Hello, hello, can everybody hear me? You can, I think you can, excellent. My name is Ian Dunt, I'm the editor of politics.co.uk. I chunter on about Brexit for the entirety of my life, and I rub mics against my beard. Is that what's going on? No. It's all very exciting. Well, we're going to have to put up with this for a while this sound goes away. So, Brexit, unspeakably Hello, 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 hello. Is there rustling? There is not. Excellent. We will crack on. Good. So, like I said, quick catch up. Brexit, unspeakable horror show. Nobody enjoys it. Absolute disaster for everyone, emotionally, psychologically, existentially. However, they've chosen to come and experience it with us from various European countries. We have three very celebrated journalists here from Europe who are going to talk to us about their experiences of covering Brexit for their respective newspapers. I really if we get to the end of tonight and I can understand why you have come here to go through this horror show with us, I think I'll have done terribly well. So I'm going to read out your names in case I get the pronunciations terribly wrong. So starting to my left, we have Stephanie Bolzen, who's a UK and Ireland correspondent for German Welt. Marion von Rentgen. You're so polite. That was so sweet. Okay, fair enough. Yeah. I'll take that. Multi-award-winning French reporter who's currently freelance but spent 30 years at Le Monde, and Antonello Guerrera, UK and Ireland correspondent for La Repubblica. So I guess starting with you, Antonello, let's start with what's the worst thing about covering Brexit?
The worst thing.
If you can pick just one.
Let me think about that. No, the worst thing is that every day fighting with your editors saying, well, this is a very important thing, to cover today because it's happening this and this, and say, again? Still with Brexit every day? Say, yes. Because I think that, okay, we can cover everything like the British newspapers, of course, as we are foreign correspondents. But it's every day I have to fight because it's something that is so. It is just taking a long time and also, it's a crucial moment, not only for the UK, I think, but also for the whole West, because if, the UK leaves Europe and EU, from the other side, we have in the United States Donald Trump, who is a president who doesn't care about the transatlantic alliance or. So it's a shaping moment. Is a moment that can shape everything for the next decades. So this is the most difficult thing. Just being every day really committed to the issue. And also another difficult thing is explaining all the very technical stuff, to the Italian readers, because like the backstop and the withdrawal agreement and the political declaration and the backbenchers. But this is so important thing. And the most beautiful thing is that if people, especially, I see that with the Italian readers, if you see that you are passionate and they understand that, the British politics is also very particular, it's so passionate, so it's like a theater also, every day, in the House of Commons, and that's why the House of Commons speaker, John Bercow. It's so famous in the you cannot imagine how famous he is in continental Europe. It's like an idol, really.
Seriously.
It's like a mixture of Shakespeare and Monty Python. You know, it's so everybody loves him. I swear.
Someone told me the other day that apparently some meetings in Brussels now, not even in politics, even in just business, people apparently will just sit down and be like, order!
Yeah, really. I mean,
amazing.
I see. Yeah,
I'm glad that we've still kept our comedy exports.
Yeah,
At least
even even you know the quietest colleagues I have. When I answer the phone, someone says "order."
Marion, is it quite hard to sort of explain what's going on with Brexit to sort of like a French audience without sort of talking about all the cultural baggage that sort of comes with it, of all these years of Euroscepticism and sort of, the Tory party and all of that?
Well, I have first to make a confession. I have to make a confession. Is that I love Brexit.
Okay, this is terrible. I've come to the wrong place.
I hate it as a citizen, but I love it as a journalist. I think it's the most amazing circus show that I have ever seen in my life, and it's an obsession for me. And as far as I understood, it seems to be an obsession in your country too, but I think it can't be as much an obsession as it is to me, because I think that Brexit, to me, contains so many things. It's much broader than Brexit. I mean, it reveals something very, very important of the times being, and it contains all the ingredients, all the signals, all the signs, all the elements of the rising populism today. And so it's fascinating to me, because it's an amazing story, and I think that the year 2016 is a clue year for the next decades, because something happened with the Brexit that is going to be followed through with Trump, with Bolsonaro, with Salvini, with the AfD coming for the first time after the war in Parliament, in Bundestag. You have in France, it's very special what's happening today too, because we had an extraordinary. It was almost as much fun to follow than Brexit, the presidential election. I mean, it was such a suspense and such a thrilling story, with Marine Le Pen just coming next to the last line, so we had this, and now we have the gilets jaunes, the yellow vests, which means something which is very near to what happened with Brexit too, because it has the same symptoms, the same disease is inside it. And so that's all the reasons why I think that Brexit is absolutely fascinating, and it's not a British story, it's ours, because we are, of course, your mistake has heavy consequences on our European story. I think it's a tragedy, and for my part, I'm very Anglophile and strong European, and I'm desperate. I mean, I'm mourning all day about what's happening with Brexit. But to answer your first questions, I think that in France, most of the people don't care, to be honest.
Very sensible.
Most of the people don't care, and the people who care don't understand anything. So that's a little bit simple. And as I'm an obsessed girl with Brexit, they look at me like sort of a Martian, because say, oh, you're Brexit. And I came here in London for Christmas, and my friends offered me a book on Brexit for children, how to understand Brexit or something, and they know that I'm crazy about that, because I repeat, it's not Brexit only. I think it's something is going to be very, very different for the time being, and the clue, the starting point will remain Brexit.
When you say they don't understand anything, do you mean like the day-to-day changes going on in the debate, or you mean the sort of the currents that led to it and that caused
Yes,
it?
because it's a no-ending story, and they thought that once you had a referendum, it was finished. So we could talk about something else. And we're 3 years later, we are still talking about the same things and having debates in Westminster and say, well, they didn't vote already. So we can't understand. And you know that because I think that you were, well, I'm sorry to say it, but you are a sort of a laughing stock.
Sure. We understand this now.
I
we're coming to
apologize
terms
for
with
saying
We're
that,
dealing with
but
it.
you are. But on the other side, I think that something happens here, which personally I admire very much, is that you still you keep having a very strong sense of democracy. I mean, when you are rebelling in France, we go in the streets and destroy all the things and tag the Arc de Triomphe and say that you fucking Jews and so on. And you make things very properly in Parliament. So, and I think that it's you have all my admiration for that, because we don't know the politics in France has turned so stupidly vehement and radical, and we are rude towards the people are rude towards the politicians, and the politicians are rude towards the others, and the insult is the only game, the only word they have in the mouth, and here I can see Theresa May and Jeremy Corbyn at 1 meter of distance and shouting at each other, but very politely, my honourable gentleman, my honourable, and I can spend hours watching at the debates in the House of Commons. I think it's fascinating, and it's very different to what we have in France. And I like the sense of debate you have, very quick debates and question and answers, since we have very lyrical gentlemen and ladies, and making long lyrical speeches, and our president is a very lyrical person too.
Yes, I noticed.
So and you have Angela Merkel, which is another sort of
she's certainly not lyrical.
She's not very, very much lyrical. You know, Pascal Lamy, who was the former director of the OMC, the World Trade Organization, and he said to me that he met Angela Merkel and François Hollande once, and he said to them, you have to speak in favor of Europe. You have to enchant, to how you say in English. You have to put some love in Europe to make people love it. And Merkel say, I'm sorry, Pascal, I'm not a poet.
Oh, very good. That's what I love her. It's actually, it's definitely, there's a bunch of the German myths have played quite a key role actually in the British debate. I mean, myth number one, I don't know if anyone informed you, was that your car industry was going to come save us from a terrible deal, something that didn't transpire, funnily enough.
Strangely, I've heard that 150,000 times.
No, I'm not surprised that you may have tired of it. The other one is that sort of Merkel will be the sort of deus ex machina that just comes down at the end of the process and saves Britain, because ultimately she gets on quite well with Theresa May or whatever. Is it quite, for a start, do you have to communicate to a German audience quite a lot of these myths that we have? Are they aware of the role that we project Germany from having?
No, it's more the other way around. So I get asked these questions a lot here. So will the German car industry save the Brexit deal? No. Will Angela Merkel, because they would have done that already years ago, and they haven't moved a millimeter, so they're still where they are. They will be very much damaged by if there's a no deal, and even by whatever the Brexit deal there is. It will be not as good as it was before. But is this mine now?
No, it's still my. Is it my beard?
I don't know.
Well, we'll find out if it cuts on.
Anyway, and the second thing, I'm not quite sure. I mean, Merkel has a certain reputation, because during the Greek crisis, she was actually the one who, late at night, back in 2010, she was sitting down with, I think at the time, Sarkozy. Was it still 2010 with Sarkozy?
10 was Sarkozy, yeah.
And they hammered out this deal very late at night. And so this is the typical Brussels game. I was based in Brussels before I came here, so it was 4 years. I think I had something like 18 councils in 2 weeks, this kind of, when there was a Euro crisis. And at the end, they always come to a deal. But this is a different situation now, because Britain is leaving. Yeah, you don't have to be with the Brits afterwards. So why do you really have to compromise? And the other thing as well is that this government, with all respect, has played it very, very badly. And I think this is also the reason everybody's saying, oh, why have they stuck together, the Europeans? I'm convinced if Theresa May had not from the beginning put out her red lines and had been more prone to compromise and a bit more clever, she would have very easily sought disunity in the EU 27. But the stubbornness, and you say a laughing stock, I'm not happy about saying this, because I think we still have to live together, all of us, and we are still Europe, and there are so many challenges coming, and I'm not lyrical here, but I think we really face the same challenges. So we shouldn't start pointing at each other saying the Germans are stubborn and the British are a laughing stock and the French are just stupid. So I think
they are.
No, they're not.
I feel we are a laughing stock. I was very comfortable. I didn't
Nothing wrong with that.
But I think this is because you are too, rightly so, you're very critical of yourself, but people in Germany, as you say, and in France, they don't care that much.
No.
I mean, they look at Berko and find him very funny, and they look at Theresa May and think, how on earth can this woman survive all these months being the victim of everyone?
I would say that there is a sort of a Schadenfreude, as you say in German. Schadenfreude, it means that you're happy with the others being unhappy, and we have a sort of a Schadenfreude with Brexit, because thanks God it didn't happen
but
to us.
it shows you that your own project is not going well.
Of course,
if you have
of
to
course.
say they are leaving,
Of course.
actually, because we can say they are stupid, and actually we don't
No,
have to talk about ourselves.
I was joking. Of course not. And of course, I just said as an introduction that I feel very much concerned about what's happening. But I say that the reactions of people, it's a sort of a mixtures of there are various reactions and attitudes, and the common people say some of them don't care and some of them laugh and some of them, but I mean it's good to laugh. I mean when people came from Auschwitz and they had the sense of humor, you have to laugh, otherwise the world is finished. I mean.
Are you finding it hard to get sort of stories past the editor about Brexit? Is there resistance there, as you were sort of alluding to, there was certainly in your newspaper?
I'm certainly not reporting at all the day-to-day stuff, not at all. So I'm not writing every day. We have a different system now, and that has more to do with the trying to survive in a more and more difficult age for journalism, as we talked before. So, and we have a paywall. So people will not pay for something that is on the agencies or on Yahoo or on Google anyway. So we are trying to do more features or interviews, or try to find an angle to the Brexit story. So, for example, by reporting from Northern Ireland and then putting it out the day that there's a vote, or I'm doing a story on PPE actually currently, which we will put out at the beginning of next week, asking where does the mess come from? It was eaten in PPE, the Oxford.
Oh wow!
So it's more trying to find angles that are somehow a bit surprising for a German audience, but still are in the context with Brexit. And that's what I find also fascinating about Brexit. It gives you a platform for everything. Whether it's economics, whether it's culture, whether it's politics, and it's fascinating how you can play it.
You can actually almost use it to do... There was a book that was sort of quite big when I was a kid called How Does This Work? And it was steam engines and TVs and blah, blah. And you almost use it as a how does this work engine. You just think, how does food get onto my plate? You know, where does it come from in the country? You know, how do our aviation treaties work? And what you find yourself writing is these pieces over and over, which are basically, how does the world work and why did we set it on fire? But, you know, the former part is still sort of quite prominent in that. And so you suggested earlier that the technical aspects, it's quite hard, even as a Brit, it's quite hard to write, to imagine how much does your reader know. So, for instance, if you talk about the backstop, you can, of course, say it's an insurance policy for the Irish border. But to talk about what were the motivations for why she did it, and suddenly you can lose 7 parts on context in the middle of your piece. That must be even sort of harder when you're writing for a foreign audience.
Yeah, it is, but you always have to do that because readers, the only time that I didn't do that, I got 3 emails from readers saying, how can I the hell understand what is the backstop? I say, okay, the piece was kind of 12 lines, so I cannot explain that in 12 lines what is the backstop. But yes, but you always have to explain everything. I mean, it's too complicated. I mean, it's there is no way out.
Yeah, it's a sentiment that I know well, actually. Yeah.
But there are worse things like Italy has the most populist government in the West, so so it's much worse than having the burden to explain the fact of. But apart from the jokes,
Do people recognise that it's the same sort of thing? I mean, you alluded to it as, Trump and Salvini and Brexit is the same phenomenon. Do people think of them in those terms, or do they think of them as quite distinct? Those are the Italian audience.
I think that they have something in common, of course.
But they're seen as having something in common, or...
Yeah,
I mean, for an Italian...
Italian
readers.
You mean for Italian readers? Yes, I mean, yes, they of course, I mean, we also have we are a center-left leaning newspaper, so they consider that, and we often have, connected, this different, events that happened. But I think that they have something really different too. I think that Brexit is not just a spin-off of the word populism. I mean, it's also something connected with the history of the country too. I mean, when the Leave campaigns, I take back the control, or take the control back. I don't
take back control.
Yeah, take back control. I mean, that was something also that was a reminiscence of the past too, I think. But whilst in Italy we have this very populist government now mainly because of the migration crisis. That's the 50% of the reason of that, But and we also have, many readers are really interested. In Italy, many readers are really interested in Brexit because some representatives of the incumbent government, they have talked about Italexit in the past, So they consider Brexit like an experiment, that someone else has done. So let's see how.
But in a way, I would say that we are grateful to Brexit because I don't know. In Italy,
you are too mean towards.
No, I mean no, because in France too, we had a lot of. You have Italexiter, we have a lot of Frexiters, and they are just calmed down now because they see your mess. And I said, my God, and you have no leader in Europe, even among the most nationalist populists today who are in power today. No one wants anymore to. No one speaks about leaving the European Union.
Even Le Pen has stopped.
Even
right?
Le Pen stopped saying it, and Salvini stopped saying it, and all are there very low profile. Thanks to you. So thank you very much.
Our pleasure.
Salvini did something bigger. I mean, on the Lega is the party. On the Lega at the quarters, there was written before the election, "Stop Euro." Stop Euro. I mean, big capital letters,
When was it?
On their head quarters.
No, when?
Before the election.
Before the election. But after, Brexit and after the election, he just, deleted that. Yeah, really.
And is that all to do with Brexit, or is that, there's obviously factors. There was a sort of spooking of the currency markets in Italy, wasn't there? And there's obviously domestic stuff that's at play there as well. Or is it just that we've just turned into this monstrous moral instrument for the rest of the world?
What do you mean?
There's also surely domestic factors that play into that.
Absolutely.
For instance, the currency markets.
Of course.
I think there's a lot of discontent in Germany and France, wherever, with the European Union and how it works, and people feel disenfranchised and it's not democratic and so on and so forth. But there's a big difference historically. I think really Britain. The longer I'm here, I think you guys. You will kill me for that, but I think you don't belong to the European Union.
No, come on.
I think it's very hard to say, and I don't mean it this way, but I think culturally it's really different. It is different in the sense of why do you need the European Union? You don't really need it. You have never been conquered. You have the transatlantic relations. You have the Commonwealth. You have a different political system. In Germany, the European Union is a survival guarantee. It is protecting us against ourselves because we have this big shadow of our past. You look very critical, but I can tell you how I
We'll go to questions later.
Maybe I should explain that. I always explain that in a way. The other day I gave a talk at a sixth form in West London, and I asked them, so what do you learn in history about Britain, or about what has Britain not done really well in the past? They couldn't answer that. They said, well, maybe colonial history wasn't all okay, but pretty much everything was fine. And I told them when I was 10 years old, in my secondary school, we started learning about the Holocaust. And we had these pictures from Auschwitz, where you saw piles of dead bodies coming out of Auschwitz. I was 10. I was a child. And you can discuss, was that the right thing to show a 10-year-old? Probably not. But that has stayed with me for my life. And it's still, and asked my niece, she was here the other day, she's 19, what was the main topic? Of course it was the Holocaust in the Nazi time. Maybe a bit less, but it's still, and it's obvious why it is. It's such a big piece of history and of German history. But we have a very different understanding of Europe. It's a cultural, historical understanding. While here, most people, and I didn't really mean to offend you by saying, I want to provoke you, by saying you actually don't belong there. For you guys, it was what it was promised in 1973. It was going to be a trade, an economic union, and I think that also makes sense. And I can understand why people do not want political integration.
What do you think of the argument that sometimes comes up that's that you need some countries, basically, like the Brits, to a lesser extent, maybe like the Dutch, who are constantly sort of a break and being like, oh, let's just slow down here and just not go too quickly. You need other countries, typically like the French, sometimes like the Germans, depending on the issue, going, no, we need to consolidate this down further. And it's actually by having all of those voices mixed up together that you find yourself in a better position.
Yeah, and that's what especially Germany will badly miss with Britain leaving, is that Britain in certain things was far less euphoric than the French, because the Germans are actually always a bit scared of the French, because the French are pushing for more integration. And especially, it means actually pushing for more integration means Germany has to pay more money.
It was different before, it changed.
Well, yeah, but in general, especially when it comes to budget, the Brits were always stopping.
Sure.
When it comes to defense, although I think defense has changed a little bit now with the threat of Russia, with terrorists and so on.
French have not a very good reputation with budget and with finance.
No.
That's with
why.
military, though.
So that's something now that I think there are certain potential. But if you look at the big projects like Schengen, like the Euro, this has been many years ago it was decided. What they're doing now is managing it. They're not really doing big integration projects anymore. They don't. Well, there's nothing. I mean, okay, asylum policy, they're trying, but because they have to. But everything else, I don't see so much more integration, really.
Is that view that you just expressed quite common in Germany?
I don't know. I've not
Haven't
been
been back
living
for a
in
while.
Germany for 10 years. I think what Brexit has done in Germany very much is awake the love for Europe. So it was a counter-reaction that people went on the streets. They really stood up for Europe and said, something is at stake. That's our model, how we want to live, and we will defend it. And so actually what is interesting, if you look at the recent election results in Germany, the AfD has a lot of votes. But who has as much votes as the Greens? And the Greens are pro-migration, they are pro-European Union. So there's a lot of reaction to Brexit that has repercussions everywhere else.
Is there a sense that the AfD wave might be coming to a halt now? Is there any sense of that?
Difficult to say. I mean, I don't know. We'll see at the European election. I think the AfD might almost win the European election. And then there are 3 elections in East Germany. No, you're not stopping them. But I don't think they will grow much more.
Sorry, please.
Because I think this is really interesting. I mean, Italy, until 30 years ago, 20 years ago, was one of the most Europhile countries. And this was really interesting because, we were also like, we were the founders also of the European Union and so on. After that, it's something changes, especially with when the euro currency came, and that changed a bit. And I always thought about that because that made the European Union not only an a political structure, a political union, but especially an economic one, financial one, and. When there was the migration crisis, I think that was the turning point of the sentiment of Italians toward the European Union. When there was the migration crisis and Italy was left alone by the other countries, that was, I think, something that their breakup. I mean, the Italians, I mean, many Italians viewed as the European Union not anymore as a union, really, where to share, ups and downs, pros and cons, but just as a financial structure, an Euro technocrat structure. That was the shift, and that's why I think that also, in some way, the United Kingdom never maybe had the same sentiment, because maybe, as Stephanie has just said, there was more economic
transactional
deal.
you call that, I think.
That more than like human ideological union, and that's I think it's very important, even though I still say that the United Kingdom was in the most perfect position. I mean, in the European Union. I mean, before the referendum, the United Kingdom had many pros and less cons than many other members.
Do you think there's that thing you mentioned, that sort of sense of faith in Europe as a sort of ideological project in Italy, is that broken forever, or is there any chance of that coming back?
Well, it's going to be broken.
I'm asking really small questions right now. You can understand.
I think it's because we can't predict future, but I do think that it is going to be broken for a long time, because now we also have a really populist government, and of course, they are not giving any, they just don't like the EU as we have seen in the recent weeks. I mean, and they every day, even though they just don't talk about quitting euro currency of the European Union because it's not convenient anymore, and also because we cannot hold a referendum on international treaties as the Constitution says. So as a British, we don't have this danger if they don't change the Constitution. That's going to happen. Yes, but because now many people in Italy think also that with the euro currency we have lost much wealth and power, and it's unless there is. If there is more growth and there's this economic shift, yes, of course. But if the things stay like now, I mean, it's really hard. Even though, also because I think that the main reason of populism in the West is the economic and financial crisis in 2008, 2009. Otherwise, sure. we would never had the Brexit, the referendum, or Donald Trump, or whatever.
Yeah, no, everything stems from them, certainly. Mariam, we sort of, especially sort of quite Romanian people like myself, we always have this story that we start telling where we basically go, Britain used to be really admired for its practical judgment and its moderation, and now we're the laughingstock that you sort of mentioned. Is it true, the first bit? Is that just something we like to tell ourselves, or actually...
Which is true, that you...
The idea that people, around Europe and the world, or let's take France, for instance, used to think of us as people with this, very moderate, sensible, practical judgment, or did they just already think that we were sort of quite arrogant and inward-looking, as we have apparently transpired to be?
Well, yeah, you have the reputation. We were quite bemused by what happened because you were supposed to be one of the wittiest people in Europe, if not in the world. And you know, in negotiations, we are very scared about the British taking over everyone in the negotiations, etc. And suddenly you made such a stupid thing. I mean, but so the least is to say that it's an amazement. But I think that it's very true what you said. I totally agree what you said about the small sense of Europe that you have always had in Britain. And I remember I interviewed Tony Blair on that subject, and I said to him, "It's a pity that you didn't lose the war." Because, and he laughed a lot, and he started laughing, and I said, yes, because I think that you would be less arrogant if you had lost the war like us. I mean, you were sort of you didn't need anyone. You were not occupied, as you said, and you have a sense of superiority since the Second World War that we can't have. We needed Europe more than you needed it. And he said to me, after having laughed a lot and being shocked to my question, he said that he agreed that, and one of the problems, because I think I take Tony Blair as the most European leader you ever had. I mean, he's really a strong European, and like a German could be, or like a French could be. He's very, very strongly European, and he's a specimen in Britain. I mean, I never seen that in Great Britain. And so he said to me that one of the mistakes that Britain did is not to have been one of the founders in Europe. It could have been at the time the six countries were together, and they refused, and it was a very big mistake that marked the rest of history. And the other thing is what makes Brexit so interesting in the broader movement of populism is that this question of referendum. I'm very suspicious against the use of referendum, and I think it's a sort of a fantasy and of a poison of democracy, because it comes from the idea that it's more democratic to have a direct vote with a yes/no question than to go through the parliament. And it's nonsense. I mean, for very complicated questions like Brexit, I mean, nobody knew what Brexit meant. That's the problem you have now. Because you said, yes, so we are going out, we're going in. What does it mean, going out? There's so many things of going. So it means so many things, and people forgot what that 45 years of links, of economic links, it's more than a couple in marriage. I mean, we are absolutely the same body now, Britain and the rest of Europe. So nobody thought about that, and I'm very angry against the Remainers who get awake now very late. Maybe all of you, because no one pointed out any argument against Brexit correctly before the referendum. The debate happened now, and the silly things. And we had it in France in 2005 too. We had we asked the question through referendum: do you want to have a constitutional treaty or not? And people say not, because when you have a referendum, you never answer the question you're asked. You answer the context, and the question means: are you happy with the situation, or are you not happy with the situation? Nobody's happy with the situation, so everybody says no. And I think that there is something very interesting in the words you used: leave or remain. It's worse than yes and no, because leave or remain, it means leave. It's sort of a freedom of I leave, I go, or I travel, and I go away, and everything is beautiful, and I remain in my house and stuck to my mud. So I think that even in the words, it was lost since the beginning, and the intelligent or the clever things, but it's easy to do the story afterwards, to remake the story, but it would have to well, Cameron was, we didn't think at anything, but he could have thought about asking 3 questions, for example. If he had thought a little bit more about what it meant to have a referendum and the consequences, he would have asked, do you want to remain, you want to leave, you want to leave that way, this way, no Brexit, no deal. But nobody thought about, thought about the border in Ireland. Nobody had in mind that it was it was impossible to resolve. The metaphor of the impasse was Ireland, and nobody had in mind it. It in mind. It's crazy when you think about it. And now the question of the issue of a referendum is very, very much in the speeches of the yellow vests in France. They all want they want a referendum. They want the death of Macron. That's the first thing they want. They want to behead him. So this is to start with, and then they want referendums.
It is traditional, to be fair.
Well, it's traditional. Yeah,
you did that.
Yeah, we have the pleasures we can have, in France. So we like to behead people, and so they want to behead Macron. They want to take the National Assembly. They want to go to the Élysée and destroy things and destroy the windows. And this is very funny. And they want to have referendums for everything. I mean, and they want to have a referendum. Do you want to keep or to kick out Macron? Yes, no. You want to have a retirement. To stop working at 30 years old. 30 years old. Yes. So they want a referendum for everything.
I'm with them, man.
Yeah, with them too.
I'm up.
And it's very simple because they want, for example, no taxes, no more taxes, but they want more public services. So of course, me too. They want everything, and I think that there is a point, and nobody dares to say it because it's very populist. It's very fashionable to say to offer referendums to people because we are democratic. We offer you referendums, but I think this is a poison. This is the death of democracy, referendum. And you have you should. I hope that the British example of the terrible and tragic mess of Brexit will serve as an example for the future that referendum shouldn't be used or very, very cautiously and maybe with several very questions. Otherwise, it's the autobahn for populism.
Yeah. Which we saw, in this. You guys obviously did see it during the French Revolution. The will of the people overtakes everything else.
Yeah.
We saw it in the English Civil War in the 1600s under Cromwell. Exactly the same things are there. That idea of this well of sovereignty that you can just grab and use to replace your parliamentary structures and your formal political systems goes through pretty much all of our histories. It's the same in Germany, I think, right? The idea of referendums are quite alien and strange to the way that it operates.
Yeah, I mean, Germany had quite some bad experience with very populist leaders.
Yes.
So it's basically there are only referendums on. I think there were only twice in post-war history when the Saarland had to decide whether it wanted to be French or German. Sometime in the 50s, there was a referendum about the Saarland. They decided to stay with Germany. I don't know why. And then you have referenda on regional or local level, which can then be in a coalition. So there was, for example, some years ago, a big debate about a new train station being built in Stuttgart. So that was then also decided by a referendum, but that was a massive political story. No, seriously, it was a massive political story.
I prefer your big political stories.
But you wouldn't, I mean, because of the German constitution, the federal system and everything else, there is no space for referendum. I'm absolutely sure that actually the experience of Brexit will warn anyone with a little bit of responsibility or feeling of responsibility that you should keep your fingers off that.
Yes, so I'm going to wrap the conversation up now and go to questions. But very briefly before I do, I just wanted to ask one more thing from each of you, which is just how are you treated by the political machine here, by Number 10, by Parliament? Is it quite difficult to get information now? Is it getting easier? Has it changed anything?
It has changed fundamentally. So,
really?
Yeah. So when I started it back in 2013, because I came from Brussels, and Brussels is like always call it Erasmus for grown-ups,
right.
Because you are in Brussels and you see your colleagues all the time, and it's like a bit of a playground of Europhile. And you can go to the Parliament, you know the MEPs, you know the Council, you get a lot of access. And then I came here, and I even not one MP would talk to me. I mean, literally, like I'd rather talk to the Lincolnshire Herald than to German. Well, fair enough. Apparently, it's the same in Washington. I hear from colleagues because
It's like that for me when I go to the SNP conference. It's shit.
Yeah.
Terrible. No one will speak to me. Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah, but why would they? First of all, there's a risk. They could say something that then plays back to the British press, and second, it doesn't have any impact. So that has changed completely now. So now we have the briefings by DexEU, by the Department for Exiting the European Union. We get quite a lot of access to MPs. We have, Antonello and I are in a background group. We have a lot of really high-ranking politicians we talk to. They are interested what we are doing. It goes vice versa. So Europe has become a bit of a constituency because especially now before the withdrawal agreement and the political declaration was agreed back in November, because actually it was agreed, if you remember.
I do.
They needed good press in Europe, so because they didn't want the laughingstock headlines, because that would make it more difficult for the national governments to agree a deal with the Brits. So they tried to have a certain impact on it. It didn't quite work.
No.
But so
Nice try though.
and I think it will come back now in the second phase, and will be even more intense when we are really starting Brexit. I mean, this is just the first act. We are now really going into the hard phase, which is hammering out a trade deal. And I think it's going to be even more difficult if Theresa May is gone. Who comes next? And if it's a Boris Johnson, it will be whoever, but it will be a Eurosceptic at the head of the Tory party. I don't know if you agree.
Sure.
What kind of negotiations will we have?
Yeah.
And then you have another cliff edge and another no deal.
Usually I depress people when I talk about this. Mary, have you had the same experience of doors starting to open up?
Well, I didn't cover, I never lived here, so I didn't cover, strictly speaking, I didn't cover politics here. But can I just to end with ask a question to the audience, because I just figured out that we are 4 countries here. We have Italy, France, Germany, and Britain. And my question to the audience would be, who is the maddest?
Who is that?
The maddest,
maddest.
the most
The
crazy.
most crazy.
And I think that the winner would be Britain today.
It is right now, yeah. Have you had those? I mean, you've just joined the lobby, haven't you? So
Yeah. I mean, yes, I totally agree with what Stephanie said. I mean, it was a radical change, especially in the latest months too, because the negotiations are going on. So and also everyone is also thinking about what there is after. I mean, a future relationship, even the Brexiters. I mean, everyone is interested in that. So, of course, we don't have the same access that the British, journalists have, but we can mix that with a different perspective, and sometimes it's not really often, but sometimes I feel that because we are not so toxic with all the Brexit process. We can find something that the local newspapers and journalists maybe because they got used, so they got accustomed. They just can't see, and that happens.
yeah, it does. Yeah,
But when in Italy the Financial Times correspondent or the New York Times correspondent sees something from his perspective that the Italian reporters never thought about.
You get blind.
It often takes someone from the outside, right, to spot the thing that has been in front of everyone's face.
But I mean, my personal experience with MPs and politicians, I mean, they're really, it's not very easy to talk with them, as Stephanie said, but they are melting. I mean,
There was a funny thing. We had Steve Baker the other day,
Oh, you poor things.
and he seriously said, I wanted to prove to you that I'm actually a nice person.
Oh.
And we were like, I don't know you. I didn't think you were an evil person, but
Yeah, but now that you said that,
Now that
you
you
kind of
said
got
that, I might think about it.
Okay, guys, let's do some questions. How long have we got? We've got a little bit. We're kind of okay. Yeah, please go ahead, sir.
Hi, thank you. Great talk. Avid Remainer here. I found it really interesting what you said about the Brexit bringing Germany together in its pro-European stance. And I feel something similarly actually about being English. And it's brought people who believe in Europe together here too in this odd way. And I would say, like, because I'm constantly looking at all my European friends and outwardly wondering to what extent do the people who voted Remain and who have become very impassioned Europhiles, are they recognized within Europe as being a force that, although maybe politically kind of null at the moment, very much existent and very much a part of the culture that is England?
That was a great question. You really should have sat in this chair, frankly.
I mean, on a personal level, it breaks my heart to think that you are a Remainer and you would so love to stay and you are forced out. I mean, that must be tragic. That is absolutely terrible. But I do think people are in Germany very aware of it. There is still a lot of people who somehow think there will be a miracle and it will all be turned around and it's not going to happen. We have to explain them every day that it's very unlikely. It is going to happen sooner or later. But I think, to be honest, the main coverage, of course, is the government. And there are some, from time to time, you have the big march, like the one, when was the last one?
June.
In June, it's massive, that's covered then. But then the next day, you have coverage about Theresa May again and how she's hammering on with her red lines. So it's not really perceived, and I think at the end of the day, it's our personal relationships. I mean, that will make the difference whether you are a European Union member or not. This is what will stay, and that's why I'm saying we have a big responsibility here to not be also the populist headlines and putting out the stuff about all the Brits are stupid, because you're not. Of course you're not. I mean, it's not your responsibility what your government is doing. So what I want to say is, like, just try sometimes to just push the noise away and think of the future. And we have, as Joe Cox said, we have far more in common that divides us. Sounds pathetic, but that's true at the end of the day, I hope.
Do you guys think that there's... sorry, that's a terrible interviewing tactic. Hello. You are one individual human being. Is there a sense in France...
I feel depressed suddenly.
Sorry, we're all alone, we die alone. So. Is there a sense of sort of Remain as this quite vibrant... You do, as the gentleman said, like, there is suddenly a sense of... a lot of people in this country are starting to think of themselves as Europeans almost for the first time, and to sort of work out their values in opposition to what is happening. Is there much coverage of that, much sense of that in France too? Yes,
I'm like you. It breaks my heart to see that to see all these people who don't want to leave Europe, and we want them to. I want you to stay with us. So, and I think it's something heartbreaking to see that the history is doing the things by its own way without. I heard. I like very much your former Minister Lord Heseltine. And he said, I saw many videos with him saying that it's absolutely nonsense that you have 70% of the population among the young people who want to remain, and you have and it's the older people who have voted for Brexit. So the older people have decided the destiny of the young people, and I think this is absolutely unbearable. However, it's a little bit sad that you have this European feeling just now. I mean, it's true that sometimes I have a lot of friends, of course, among the strong Remainers, and I like you know, maybe this young guy, I love him, Femi Oluwole, the black guy. Cool. And he's a friend, and we had a lot of talks about that, and I said, why didn't get away sooner? I mean, it seemed that suddenly Britons realized what Europe means, and you know, I was quite angry, or maybe because I'm an outsider, but I didn't understand what you did when you had general elections in 2017, I think, January.
Sure.
And I thought you had a historical opportunity to send a message. You had Brexit, you regretted it. And then you had only two parties who were pro-European. There were Greens and Lib Dems. And then I thought if I were British, I would massively vote for one of these two parties to send a message, even for yourself, but most of all for us Europeans. Say we want to stay in Europe, and we make a European Parliament in Westminster. And what did you do? You voted both for you had the tribal reaction of voting for one of the two main parties, and the two main parties were anti-European. Well, you had Theresa May was a Remainer, but she turned to be a Brexiter because she had to, as a prime minister, and she thought it was her mission to implement the referendum. Sort of God mission, I don't know, and you have Jeremy Corbyn, who everybody knows that he has always been, all his life, is a Trotskyist. He's been very anti-European, anti-American, anti-Atlantist. He's always proved to be very strongly an anti-European, and you voted for him. And when I saw these elections, I said, you don't know what you want. You missed the opportunity to do something. And when I see the group of the independent group forming today with Chuka Umunna and Anna Soubry, etc., say, why do they wake up so late? I mean, it's useless now. It's finished. If they had done such a group before, at the time in 2017, the history could have turned differently. So it's not my role to say what you should have done, but from a French point of view, I can't understand the way you had of making politics in these circumstances.
Yeah, no, we didn't do a good job about it.
May I just add
sure,
one
yeah,
really short thing?
yeah.
I do agree with you, but also you have to think that Brexit is a very divisive thing. So, and as it splits countries, splits also, political parties.
So I speak about the Remainers.
Yeah,
what the Remainers should have done.
Sure. But I understand what you're saying, because one of the most heart-rendering scenes that I saw here in this country was a couple of months ago, when there was the pro-EU demonstration here in London, with 700,000 people demonstrating to stay.
June, a long time ago, really.
No. I mean
in
October. I mean the last one, and they were all people without any political representation. That's true.
Yeah.
And that's really sad, because that's something that is really missing. But at the same point, Brexit is so divisive that, of course, every party has also some different sensibilities. And I don't know the independent group. I mean, I'm really skeptical about the independent group, because they just are united by European sentiment. But I cannot imagine how Anna Soubry and Chuka Umunna can
but I
work
mean,
on
you have a
something
critical
else.
phase.
No, let's not get buried on the
Okay.
independent group. Okay, someone who is not a man, someone who is not a man, you have 3 seconds. No, this gentleman over here.
Hi, Marion. You talked about the being impressed with British democracy because it happens in Parliament, but I think Brexit's a great example of how people haven't spoken out in the numbers they should have done, and people have felt it's such a dry, divisive topic that we've seen a country that's just kind of head cowed as this horrible Brexit monster rolls on. If you guys can translate the term dog's dinner into German, French or Italian, we have an example of the country barking out, because this Sunday there will be hundreds of dogs at Parliament having a dog's dinner to protest, and it's by the dogs for the people, so that could be a nice angle for you.
Okay, another question. Let's go to the back. So, we have, someone.
Hi, my name is Sandra. Just one plea for a bit of empathy with us. A lot of this was misinformation. A lot of people were misled, and they also believed Labour would sort of fight Brexit, which is why they also voted Labour. And this has been rushed through. Our democracy has been sort of hijacked quite a lot. So you might think that our parliament looks like a great example of democracy, and Theresa May sounds very reasonable, but it's really not the case. So following that, I want to know what your countries, how you feel you could help us in the next phase, imagining if we do Brexit, how can we maintain the bridges and the connections? Because it is a tragedy for our country, honestly, even if a lot of people haven't realised it until too late. Thank you.
Should we do one more? Let's do
some
one
more
more. Gentleman over there in the middle. Okay. I will do the side in a second, I promise.
Yes, thank you for your assistance. As a populist, I mean, as a Democrat, I think things that are popular, attract popular support, are rather a good idea. But you, like others, use the word populist as a term of criticism, implicitly right-wing tendency to vote that way. Well, what do you understand by populism? What do you really mean by populism?
Okay. Let's address those now and then we'll go
I
back.
can.
I mean, to me, I think it's
No,
quite...
it's interesting
it's
because
quite
I.
difficult to return,
it's
but
a very,
let's go
it's a
along the
very
panel, sure.
controversial term, populism, that's true. Well, I mean, in the context of Brexit, I understand populism in the sense of someone putting a figure on a bus, which is a lie. This is what I understand as populism. I think in this context it's critical, and I think it's fair enough. Let's debate.
That is democracy. I mean, you have
Lying.
people say lots of misleading
that
things.
you do a good contribution to democracy if you're lying and you're working with wrong facts. I mean, this is the challenge of our time, isn't it? That we do not allow to have our system and our democracy undermined by people just getting away with lying.
Do you know that there must be something else to the term rather than just popular, or else we would just call it popular? And I suspect that the additional part is something to do with the idea of simple answers to complex problems. That seems to be key, and I don't think it has to be right-wing. I think there certainly is left-wing populism. We see it in lots of places. But I suspect that a core factor must be that simple answer to complex questions to make it populist. But I don't know, maybe the other members of the panel feel differently.
But you're right to ask the question. For example, well, I was lucky enough to have an interview with Emmanuel Macron recently, and we spoke about this question of and this precise word of populism, and he said to me, I am a populist and I want to be a populist. So it was a sort of a provocative, but he said that his movement En Marche came from, and I think that he had observed very carefully Salvini and the way of Salvini worked to do his En Marche movement, because he said that he's a sort of a populist, Macron, because I said he doesn't belong to left and right. He's en même temps, in the same time, the left and the right, and he is against the system, the old systems that pre-existed with the main great main parties, etc. So he destroyed something of the system, and in that way he's a populist. But I think that the populism, and it's a very controversial and ambiguous word, but the main issue of populism, which is not democracy, it's that you sort of simplify what you said. You sort of simplify the questions, and you make a strong division between what the so-called le peuple, the people, and the elites. And you hate the elites as being different of le peuple. And for example, the yellow vests, they say we are the peuple, we are the people. But I said, what about me? Am I not the people? And they said they assume that some people like me, who are a little bit more educated, urban, I don't know, live in towns and are privileged, we are not the people. But who said I'm not the people? In a democracy, I am the people as much as they are. And I think this is the very deep distinction between populism and democracy, is that democracy, you take the majority as, the majority is the winner. The populism says that the people, it means if you are poor or uneducated or against the elite, you have a sort of a superiority to the others. And I think it's the vicious thing in it.
So the lady's question at the front was basically, where do we go from here? Now, you're, of course, an impartial journalist who has no views on anything at all. But if that were not the case, what would your view be?
Well, this is very hard to to reply, because it's just it's sentiments against reporting work. But as also we said earlier, I think that the best thing to stay united and together is to talk each other about each other countries, and to understand each other even more than we did in the past, in order to maybe in 10 years to the UK maybe is back into the EU, maybe.
I think,
I suspect that you're going to say the best thing that Britain could do right now is just to take the deal.
yeah. I mean, I think it's not a good deal, but I think it's better to sort this out. I think a second referendum will be absolutely toxic for the country. I'm quite convinced of that. I think the problem of the deal is not so much the Northern Irish backstop, it's more the political declaration, because it's a very wide definition of the future relationship, and it pretty much will come back to the fact that Britain will have to stay far closer, unify or tied to the European Union that the Brexiteers want, and that will then come up again. But interestingly, I've been talking today actually to someone who said that they will put more staff now in the British Embassy in Berlin. So they are already thinking ahead of how do we strengthen bilateral relations, because that's the future. You need more bilateral relations, and of course both sides have the interest of having things going as smoothly as before. And so it will be bilateral stuff. So if you want to find a new business model, you should maybe go into bilateral relations, Britain, whatever country.
That does sound more viable than journalism, so I might consider it. Yeah. On this side, yes, please.
Thank you. Great conversation. My name is Sabra Ahmedi. I'm one of Britain's youngest imams from the Ahmadiyya Muslim community. The society which we live in, our social and political landscape, within that landscape, Islamophobia is rife. Thus my question is, do you think a reason why people voted for Brexit was Islamophobia?
Okay. Do you have any more on this side? Yes, please, go ahead, man.
I grew up in the Netherlands. So for the first time, I understood why I am still holding to my passport. Just what you said about, as a young person, you grow up always commemorating the Holocaust. I came from Nijmegen, very close to German borders, and so I wonder. Regardless, I know being European is very honorable, and especially all the European institutions, because they come from that. Human rights, values, the European courts, and you name it. But any other person in London is still European. So I wonder, regardless the solidarity and our honorable, how do you say, identity as European, why is the UK still attracting all of us? Because I've been speaking to the Dutch ambassador to the UK, and he was telling me 1/3 of the Dutch who are here are Somali. So why is Europe still, regardless, with the solidarity, with the beautiful stories that you are telling, the Dutch, the Brits, that they're so stupid, why is Europe still so difficult and not open to others? And people are still coming here.
Sorry, is the question, but why do people still consider London so open despite Brexit, and they don't necessarily feel that way about other European countries?
Thank you for simplifying.
Thank you. Do we have one more question from this side? Yes, go ahead, sir.
Why does it take Donald Tusk to call out the corruption of the 2016 vote?
No, okay. Big one, you've got Islamophobia, you've got the corruption in the 2016 vote, and you've got why is London still considered open and attractive?
Because London voted Remain. I mean, and that's actually a bit cheap, because I'm sure if you go to somewhere else, anywhere else in England, you will be welcome, won't you? That's what I assume, but London even more, and because there's all these amazing opportunities. I mean, this is the most vibrant place in Europe still, apart from Berlin. Which is much cheaper.
Apparently you have houses there. It's the most affordable housing.
Yeah, it's getting more difficult. The question about Islamophobia, definitely. I really think that I think you should answer that question. Whether
I'm not allowed to. I'm strictly neutral. As you can imagine, I have zero opinion.
But
so
you are Brit. I found a lot of Islamophobia, but you find it everywhere. You find it in Germany, very much, very, very much as well. And the last question, why Donald Tusk? I mean, I find this a very, very good question. I don't know. It was here in the media as well. But I think because country is so divided, and because the media reports on the Remain campaign having corrupted the process, and the other media reports on the Leave campaign having corrupted the process, there's no outcome.
It is strange, isn't it, Marion? There's that sort of sense of it's only reported really by sort of Calcutta in The Guardian. You get a little bit on Channel 4 News, but for the rest of it, it stays locked away. I presume, is there much pickup is there more actual talk of the manner in which the referendum was conducted in France, for instance, than there is here?
You mean about the cheatings and the influence, the
Facebook
Russian
and Aaron
influence?
Banks?
A little bit, but I saw that in the Cambridge Analytica has not very much an issue in France. But we have the same concern with Russia because Putin and his media RT and Sputnik has played a very negative role in the presidential election in France too. They were very biased against Macron and in favor of Le Pen, and Putin had welcomed Marine Le Pen when she was a candidate in Kremlin, like if she was a head of state. I mean, it was amazing, and he supported François Fillon as well, and now we see that François Fillon is going and have a dinner with Putin. So, I mean, we are very much concerned about the influence of Putin through the media RT. As for Brexit, it's as you said, it's a little bit complicated, and this Cambridge Analytica. Well, I followed it carefully because Steve Bannon. I'm very interested in what Steve Bannon is doing too, and he has a crossed interest with Putin. Against Europe and in favor of Brexit. And Steve Bannon was one of the deputy president of Cambridge Analytica, and so he played an important role. And for my book, I met a very strange man. I don't know if you know him. It's called Benjamin Harnwell. He used to be a member of Parliament here, and I went to see. It was an amazing adventure. I went to see him in Rome, around Rome in the countryside, and he lives in a monastery. And he said to me, every time said to me, "Oh, Steve said," and he's very close friend of Steve Bannon, and he likes, of course, Salvini and Marion Maréchal, and they are really. It's really concerning since. There isn't. Some people said, a famous economist said, talk about the invisible hand, but there really is an invisible hand growing among these around Steve Bannon and Putin and against the European Union. And I'm afraid that we don't know what the investigations, what will be the results of the investigation. But I'm afraid that the Leave campaign owes a lot to Russia and to Russia's money, and it's awful. I mean, if we realize that they won this part too, I mean that there was such an influence, and that you were cheated by these very clever and organized people. I mean, it's depressing.
And no matter what happens with Brexit, even if it's as savage and as vigorous a severance from Europe as possible, do you think Italians will stop coming to London? Or do you think that there's something about London, insofar as possible, do you think there's something about London that will actually continue to be seen as a distinct and more open entity?
Yeah, I think that, I mean, for the Italian people, especially the younger ones, London is the place. I mean, they don't think about going to Berlin, to Paris, but just London.
I've always been very sensible with the Italians, I find.
Yeah.
I mean, and also we have here 700,000 immigrants, Italian migrants here, which is a huge number. It's like a colony, Sorry, but yeah, even though officially they are 350, but no, just they most of them they were sure that the UK was going to stay in the EU forever, and now they are rushing to register, and the consulate is going crazy. But apart from that, yes. So because if you are in Italy, and I just link it to just answering back to your question, every family or in Italy has a friend or a relative in the UK. I mean, it's really, it's really rare that no one that anyone has, nobody here. So this special bond, I mean, between the UK and the EU countries, but especially between as you said, the UK and Italy, I think that will last forever, despite Brexit or not.
Okay, final round of questions. Please go ahead, sir.
I worked as a BBC producer in Belfast, 75 to 82, and I was struck then by the breathtaking ignorance of English politicians and journalists about what was actually happening in front of their face. And what's happening now reminds me there. 3 aspects now remind me of that. Today, again, I heard, I think it was Liam Fox, somebody questioning in committee asking about Article 24, an Article 24 deal if we have no deal. That's been blown so many times. Why the backstop in Northern Ireland is essential, an area which everybody has been told repeatedly why it's essential, and also the idea that the EU is protectionist against poor African exporters of coffee to Germany. These 3 things are repeated over and over and over again, not only by punters, but by senior politicians. It was the ex-Chancellor of the Exchequer the other day. It's often John Humphreys or senior journalists, senior highly paid journalists for the BBC, of which I'm a pensioner. What do you guys think of this? Because I'm shocked by it.
Let's take another couple of questions, just behind you.
So I think that earlier you just asked which one of you were the maddest of the countries. I don't think it's here. It's actually Brazil today. They took the cake today. But I think it's just on the back making a correlation, because you were talking a lot about the Steve Bannon subject and the invisible hand operating in several places. I think that coming from Brazil, we felt that because Steve Bannon was working very closely to Bolsonaro, which is the president at the moment. So it seems like it's not only an attack to the European, as you were saying before, it feels like a much bigger project going on there. And this disfrailment of democracies in many different places, or the status quo of what's happening right now. Do you see it as a reversible, or do you see it as a reversible point, or is it definitely breaking down what's existing today to move on to something? And what do you see on the other side in your experience?
Thank you. One more question. Yes, please, ma'am.
Thanks. I wanted to express some solidarity with a colleague from La Repubblica, because I had exactly the same problem. If you're trying to report a process, it is a complete nightmare for a daily paper. With Brexit, it's almost even worse, because you had the biggest vote in Parliament against the sitting government, and lo and behold, what happens? Nothing. So it is really difficult. I've got 2 mini questions. One of them, I was told by somebody that, and I sort of scanned my European languages for support for this, that there isn't actually a word that translates very well for deal. And given that deal is so crucial to all this reporting, I wondered how you were covering it. And the other thing was that it seems to me that in the past, it's actually been quite difficult to do vox pops in the UK.
To do what?
To talk to ordinary people on the streets
Okay.
and ask them what they think. Because Americans are always, they'll tell you anything. You can present a microphone to an American and they'll give you, a whole speech. But Brits generally sort of clammed up the moment they saw a microphone. But it seems to me that over Brexit, sort of every Brit will talk, and they'll start by saying, well, I voted Remain, or I voted Leave, or whatever, and they'll give you a whole, they've suddenly become very engaged in the whole process in a way that hasn't been before.
Let's start with the definition of the word deal, or translation of the word deal. Is it? What are you using?
Accordo.
Okay.
Which is something that reminds also a good relationship in good accord.
So it's not a literal translation. It's a more positive word than the word deal, is it?
Yeah, it's has a different connotation. Yeah, but
Just that I mean, if it has traces of positivity, then that makes it very unhelpful for this particular situation.
No, Accordo, yes, it's a bit more positive deal. Yeah.
It's an agreement.
It's an agreement. Yeah. Yes. That's the
You're right.
perfect.
You're right.
translation.
Can you come back to this idea of just the amount of sort of myths that are churned out that quite, as you say, quite senior journalists, quite senior politicians seem to be engaging in, and the sort of failure of broadcast media to really start tackling them?
Well, I'm not the right person because I don't live here, so I don't follow the BBC as much as maybe you do. So maybe you should answer.
Sure. Tony, how do you feel about the question?
I might have some strong views on that. I went to Northern Ireland a year and a half ago, and I met a very nice man who's working for border communities against Brexit. A very well working organization.
I met him too.
And no, well, there are many. It's really impressive how much the Northern Irish people on the border, or Northern Irish people, have really organized themselves. And he told me that they were the ones who set up the mock border. You remember the pictures when they, we do a border here. And he got a call from the BBC, a researcher from the BBC in London, and said, we'd like to meet you and we would like to take pictures on the border with all the staff around. And he realized that researcher from the BBC did not know that there wasn't a border anymore. So, and sometimes, I mean, I really try to be not emotional about Brexit, but sometimes I get really angry when cabinet ministers on air say, well, the EU offered us Canada Plus. Yeah, but hold on. What
Can't
about
forget
Northern
those last two
Ireland?
pluses, they're very
You
important.
forget the rest of the thing. What do you do with Northern Ireland in a Canada Plus scenario? Because you can't really do it.
Right.
It's not true, and it's only half of the sentence that Barnier said. And then the other thing is that I find it disturbing that in Germany there's more understanding of the importance of the Irish peace process than here.
That's true.
That's really shocking. I think that's really shocking.
Yeah, may add just a very short thing. I drove along the border, along the 599 kilometers 3 weeks ago. I mean, I did a long report, a long read of that, meeting people living on the border, just, to tell the other side of the story, not just Westminster politics and so on. And as Steph said, I found a huge detachment from, the common story in the media or the main politicians, because there they are living people. They just are not considered. I mean, if you go to the border, not one, I mean, just one maybe in 50 kilometers voted for Brexit, and they know exactly very well what it means if a border is back. I mean, and they tell you the story. I mean, of when there was the checkpoint there, when there was the attack. Maybe that many politicians don't even know that. You know that.
Marion, what do you say to the man's point about whether it's reversible, this sort of wave of nationalism?
This is
And especially,
interesting.
can we reverse the tweets that show people pissing all over each other and talking about golden showers? Because I really feel he's not contributing to the Twitterverse in a suitable way, your president, at the moment.
Yes, it's interesting, and it comes with the question of the lady there who said, I think that's the main question we should ask now is how can we keep the bond and keep the relation strong between us? Well, in the book I'm writing, I have a sort of an intuition, a theory about of course, the financial crisis of 2008 had a crucial role on what's happening today. But I think that going a little bit further in the past, you find a reason of the starting point of the causes is the fall of the Berlin Wall. And 1989 was a very crucial moment for Europe because we attend a sort of a circle today, because at the end of the Cold War in 1989, when the Berlin Wall fell, we had a sort of a feeling of freedom. It was the end of the division of the world. It was the access of the half of Europe to democracy. So it was sort of a very huge move of happiness. And I don't know if you heard of Fukuyama, who wrote about the end of history. And we thought that we came to the end of history. It was democracy for everyone. And I met Viktor Orban at the time in the early 90s, because I lived in Hungary at the time, and he was sort of a very young man, we were all in love with him. All the girls were in love with him. He was very handsome, very heroic. He came alone in front of the Russian army, speaking against the occupation. He was against the communist regime, etc. And he embodied the freedom and democracy, Viktor Orban. And what happened for him, I think he's really the metaphor of what happened in all over Europe. Now he's a sort of a nationalist, autocratic, sort of a dictator, a young dictator. We don't know what's going to happen with him. And what happened, and I think that at least all this part of Europe, the eastern part of Europe, have a sort of a deception. They are disappointed with what they hoped when they came up to freedom, and they thought that they joined a club which were close to them during all the communist regime, and they are disappointed because in the end they had a sort of a comfort. I mean, they had no freedom of thought. The life was very difficult, but in a way they didn't have to be responsible of themselves. And suddenly they are landed in liberalism, and it's very difficult. And you have inequalities, and you have poverty, and they don't understand because the promise were not delivered as they wished that it would be. And and all over Europe, because it's not only East, because it has consequences and echoes all over Europe, even in the West. So I think that many things happened in '89, and now we have a sort of a closure of the circle, and we are going back to nationalism, back to the opposite of democracy and freedom. And Viktor Orban has a theory of illiberal democracies. It's his words. And to answer your question, I think it doesn't lead to a lot of optimism, but you realize that there are some circles in history, some cycles, and 30 years is the time of the age of a generation. And I don't know who spoke about the memory of the war. Of course, in Germany, you have very much the memory of the war, much more than we should have. And I think that's why you are one of the last real democracies, because it's really impressive how the democracy in Germany is still very quiet, and civilized in comparison with ours. And I think it's very much linked to the memory of the war, that you have in mind what you did, what Germany did in history, and you have built such a strong democracy to avoid it to happen anymore. And the thing is that the generations are forgetting what happened, what the tragedy of Europe, and why the European Union was so important, and was for the peace and for the prosperity, etc. The memories are fading, and unfortunately, I'm afraid that we might be in a new circle of a new generation, and we might have 30 more years of this other cycle, which is a little bit far away from the democracy as we used to know it.
Still, it'll be very good for journalists. So
Yeah,
there's a plus side to all of these sort of events that come up. Okay, guys, thank you very much. A round of applause, please, for our three guests.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for coming. Good night.